when we started our own schools in 2002, we even started writing our own curriculum at that time. We understood that what was available locally in Africa was not going to be suitable. It wasn't all Christian, and it wasn't always academically rigorous. And the material available in America was too American.
Right.
And so we started writing our own, and we wanted curriculum that was classical and Christian and just culturally sensitive to Africa.
Welcome to School Sisters, the podcast for the classical homeschooling mama who seeks to learn and grow while she's helping her children learn and grow. School Sisters is a casual conversation about topics that matter to those of us in the trenches of classical homeschooling who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. I'm your host, Brandy Venzel. You can find me over at afterthoughtsblog.net, spreading my Charlotte Mason joy through blog posts, study guides, audios, and more. My co-host today is Misty Winkler. Misty is a second-generation homeschooler with 5 kids and too many projects. With her blog, podcast, and membership, she helps you organize your attitude so you can organize your life. Find her over at simplyconvivial.com. Today's guests are Karen Elliott and Erica Robertson from Rafiki Schools. Karen has served with Rafiki since 1990, including 12 years on the mission field, most of that time in Nigeria. Upon returning to the U.S., she became the Director of Africa Operations for the Rafiki Home Office and was responsible for managing the ChildCare and Education Programs for all 10 Rafiki Villages, as well as curriculum development. She served at the Home Office for 10 years before being named Rafiki's Executive Director in January of 2012. Erica has worked with the Rafiki Foundation since 2010. She was the headmaster of the Rafiki School in Rwanda for 3 years, and held the same position in Nigeria for 5 years. She currently serves as the Director for Africa Operations at the Rafiki Home Office in Florida. Are you thinking about summer reading for your kids, or maybe even pulling together your book lists for next year? How do you know what books will be best for you and your family? How do you know which book lists to pay attention to and which to ignore? Can you defend your choices when people cast doubts on them? On March 27th, Stephen Rummelsberg will be teaching a workshop on how to choose good books, followed by a 45-minute question and answer session. By the end of the class, we will understand what makes a classic a true classic and why we should seek out and study the classics. Come get your bookish priorities reinforced and reinvigorated at Stephen's How to Choose Good Books workshop, Saturday, March 27th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. Register at scolesisters.com/goodbooks. Before I introduce this episode, I just want to apologize for a question that I asked Erica that may not sound fully answered to you. I assure you, she did answer my question, but unfortunately, her audio cut in and out during that time. I edited enough that it should sound fine, but if you find her answer unsatisfying, just know that wasn't actually how it went, but I couldn't save it. With that said, today's episode is our way of remembering that Christian classical education isn't just about America or the West. It's an attempt to raise up well-educated and faithful Christians around the whole globe. What does it look like to pursue this Christian heritage in Africa? Today, you'll get a very exciting glimpse. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start off with our School A every day. Misty, I'm going to have you go first and kind of, since we have new people on the show, show us how it's done.
All right. Well, I have a book I just started. I am finally reading God in the Dock by C.S. Lewis, a C.S. Lewis book I have not read before. And I like this kind of book because every chapter is an unconnected essay. It's great for like morning reading time. After I read my Bible reading challenge section, I can pick up this book and just read one chapter, and they're pretty short and it's just on a different topic. So I'm only in on the 3rd chapter, but his chapter on, I think it was chapter 2, is on miracles.
Oh, right.
And it was just a really interesting way to reason through miracles being possible and not an unusual thing to be real. Like we should expect there to be miracles. That shouldn't be a hard thing to accept. C.S. Lewis's reasoning is just an interesting thing to follow. It is a bigger book than I would have thought.
Yes.
So I feel like I got that heads up from you last year. So I was like, well, I'm going to start it in February then.
Yeah, smart. It was my goal last year to read this book, and I started it way too late. I got about halfway through and thought, I'm not going to finish in 2020. It's not gonna happen. It's okay. Just move it to the next year's list.
That's right.
All right. Karen, Erica, would one of you like to go next?
Erica, you mind if I go next?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, one of the things I've read recently was Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland.
Oh.
I think it was on a number of reading lists for last year, and Rafiki's founder and president, Rosemary Jensen, gave me a copy and highly recommended it. And I do too. It's a must read for every Christian. Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. You know, like what Misty said, it's a book you can read just a little chapter every day, like you would read a devotional almost. And what Dane built on is he built on the writings of several Puritans. So it's a wonderful introduction to the mind of several Puritans, such as Thomas Gibson. But yet he brings it to the present. And he takes a treatise of Thomas Gibson's and sort of summarizes and again makes it contemporary. And Gibson's treatise makes this unique observation, and this is what Ortland builds on. And this is what they say in the book is that this is what will catch your eye immediately is this. The only time that Jesus speaks of himself and describes his own heart is in Matthew 11:29. And what does he say? I am gentle and lowly in heart. That's the heart of our Lord Jesus Christ. He doesn't say mighty and holy, but he says gentle and lowly. So this book really ministers to your heart. When it says at the introduction of the book, it says it's written for the discouraged, the frustrated, the weary, the disenchanted, the cynical, the empty, and those running on fumes. So I don't know if anybody in this audience is at any of those categories, but if you're anywhere on that spectrum, then this is a book for you. It will really reveal Jesus's heart to you, who he really is. One of the other things it says in the book is this. It says, we sometimes have a skewed view of who Jesus is. We sin and we're like, oh, I got to go back to him again with this sin. And it says in the book, he says, Jesus is not trigger happy, not harsh, reactionary, or easily exasperated. He is the most understanding person in the universe. The posture most natural to him is not a pointed finger, but open arms. So doesn't that minister to your soul? So he goes on and on about this. And he says one more thing that I'll just kind of pull out of the book, but I really recommend you read the whole thing, is he quotes the Puritan, and Goodwin asks this question: what really gives Jesus the greatest joy and happiness? And he says, Jesus's own joy, comfort, happiness, and glory are increased and enlarged by showing grace and mercy. That's what he loves to do. That's what he gets up in the morning every day to do for his people. So it's a great book, and it still gives you a balanced picture of judgment. It's not a mushy, wishy-washy view of Christ. It's sound theologically, and it's an easy read, but it can be a very deep read. So I recommend it, Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland.
Awesome. I'm going to get that one.
Well, Erica, what about you?
Well, these days, I don't have a great deal of opportunity to do a lot of just leisure reading, but I have been reading the Brothers Karamazov as part of a course that I'm taking. So I do a lot of course assigned readings. And I've not gotten very far into it, maybe the first 6 parts, but it is really just a beautiful story. It's very engaging as a story, but I've also really enjoyed Dostoevsky's commentary on the nature of man and our souls and how we can really relate with even the worst character in the book. But then also, so many things to admire about some of the other characters. So yeah, it's a beautiful story.
Well, mine feels really shallow compared to you guys' list. But somebody has to read the secular books. So mine is Skin in the Game by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And I have been a Taleb fan for quite a while. And so this is the latest addition to his Inserto series. I gave it to myself as a reward for finishing all the books in my list last year. But I also was thinking about whether or not to have teenagers read the book because it's the most manageable in size from that series, or at least of the really well-known ones from the series, like The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile. Those are both really big books. And it's not that I'm afraid to assign a big book. It's just that a big book takes up more space in the curriculum. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to have it take up that much space. But with that said, I like the book. I'm still leaning toward Anti-Fragile, even though that's the biggest one, just because I don't know if I would, maybe he feels a little more jaded in this one or something. I don't know. The spirit of it, I think sometimes teenagers catch the spirit or the attitude of the book. And I'm just not sure so much about this one. So, but I appreciate the premise is basically that you want people making decisions to have what he calls skin in the game. So a good example would be if a king makes a law that he doesn't have to follow, he doesn't have skin in the game because he doesn't suffer from his own ordinance. But that can be applied to everything from parenting to leading a business, leading a church, whatever it is. Whenever we get the attitude of what's good for thee is not really good for me, kind of, or vice versa. It's when we run into problems. And so he applies it to all sorts of areas of life, which is really fun. I just read the section on being able to tell science from scientism, which feels really applicable right now. So anyway, it's great. And I do recommend it, but to listeners who are thinking about only reading one Taleb book, Anti-Fragile is probably the best one to read. Black Swan is great, but it's a little bit more finance theory, investment theory, and Anti-Fragile, I think, is a little more general. So anyway, that is my book.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's you'd probably like it, Misty.
Hi, Abby here with a brief note about our 2021 5x5 challenge. Hundreds of women are expanding their knowledge and connections with an intentional plan of reading. But it's hard to sustain an intentional plan over an entire year. So, inside Sistership, we have the 5x5 accountability group with weekly check-ins, quarterly meetups, and an ongoing conversations about how to make reading work in the midst of real life. Go to scholasisters.com/sistership to find out how to join us and follow through on your own 5x5 challenge.
Let's go ahead and move on to our topical discussion. And Misty, I wanted you to go ahead and just briefly explain how we got to this place. I remember that last year we recorded with, was it Kevin or Ravi? Who did we have on? It was Ravi. Okay, we talked about the classical schools in China. And I remember you saying, I know someone who does classical education in Africa. And then somehow we ended up here. Briefly tell us how we got here.
Yeah, so a family from our church, we have kids the same age. Our kids grew up together, homeschooling. It was 5 or 6 years ago now. They learned about Rafiki, the Rafiki Foundation, which has villages and classical schools in Africa. And they went to Ghana as a family. And so we've stayed in touch with them, email. I even did classes with her kids over Zoom. We had my Ghana students. It was fun. We had to arrange the time of those classes pretty carefully. But yeah, Rafiki is doing classical education in Africa, and they have just a wonderful mission there. So today we are talking to Karen Elliott and Erica Robertson, who have served in Africa and then now are serving from the home office. So Karen, you want to tell us more about Rafiki?
Sure, I'd love to. And I just want to put a plug there for Scott and Andrea Nelson and their two children, Ian and Grace. Well, they're teenagers now. And as a family, they're just doing a wonderful job there in Ghana, serving at our village. And we're so grateful. They've been out with us for at least 5 years now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Picked up, left mid-career, midlife, in a sense, with the children and moved them to a foreign country and planted themselves at the Rafiki Village. And they're helping to raise 70 to 80 orphans and
Wow.
helping to oversee a school there that's ministering to those orphans and, over 100 plus community children, just helping to help others in Africa in a tremendous way. So for those of you who know them, we love Scott and Andrea and Ian and Grace. It's they're a great family. So you asked me a little bit about Rafiki. First of all, the question is, what does Rafiki mean?
I was wondering
Misty
that.
and Randy, do you know?
I don't know.
I'm going to teach you a word in Swahili.
Okay.
Erica, you want to tell them?
Yes, well, some people might think that it means baboon because that is the name of the baboon in the Lion King, but actually it means friend.
Oh.
Correct. It's friend in Swahili. And our founder and her husband served in Tanzania in the 1960s.
Wow.
And if you want to know old-timey missionaries, they had the old-timey missionary life. They learned Swahili and they founded Rafiki in the 80s and named it Rafiki, which is friend in Swahili, because we're a friend to Africans. Now, what do we do? What's our mission? Our mission is we want to help people know God, number one. And secondly, we want to help them raise their standard of living. We don't want to do it for them. We want to help them do that. And we have always been about helping people know God in Rafiki since our beginning in 1985. We've been doing that, and we've been serving primarily in Africa all of these years. And so how do you help people know God? Well, we do that through Bible study. Rafiki's always been teaching the Bible or helping people study the Bible in every aspect of our work in Africa. And we also help them raise their standard of living. How do we do that? Through education. And that's where the classical Christian part comes through. We have classical Christian education in particular is what we're doing in Africa. The other thing that we do in Rafiki that helps people raise their standard of living and also provides Bible study is we work with impoverished women. And for all of you ladies out there, because I think mainly this is a homeschooling moms group,
Yes.
is that right?
That's right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of opportunities for you to support the work, but one of the things you might even be very appealing to you is we sell beautiful handmade crafts made by widows and poor women across the 10 countries in which we serve in Africa. And you can buy it online. And there's some really beautiful things. The things are made by women in Africa, or they are enhanced by them. And these are poor women. These are women who live on $2 to $3 a day and support 5 kids. I don't know how they do it.
Wow.
And so it's a way to minister to them. We sell their products here, and we give them the proceeds and help to run that and help them financially. And they get a Bible study. But our main mission really is to help people know God and raise their standard of living with classical Christian education. So how are we doing that? Well, in Africa, we're in 10 countries. And in each country, we have established what we call a Rafiki village. It's like a campus. Each of those villages, one in each of the 10 countries, we're on 50 acres of ground, at least 50 acres of land. And on that property, we'll have an orphanage, a children's home, from anywhere from 50 to 100 children.
Wow.
And then we'll also have a pre-K, preschool through grade 12 classical Christian school, where the children who live at the village, they go to that school. But also we've opened it up to the surrounding community, where many children in need come to the school on some form of scholarship. And then thirdly, the third thing we have at 7 of our 10 Rafiki villages is an operational classical Christian teachers college.
Oh,
We
wow.
call it RICE. It's the Rafiki Institute of Classical Education. And so we're hoping to train young African men and women who finished high school or maybe college and give them up to 3 years in teacher training. And I kind of call it Christian liberal arts light with classical pedagogy built in and a teaching practicum. Because many of these young men and women, they haven't had world history. They have not read much, if any, classical literature. And so we're starting at ground zero with the students who come to the Teachers College. And so we offer that too. We offer that to the community tuition free.
Wow.
And in many of our countries, those programs are now accredited. So the students get a 3-year accredited diploma, which allows them to teach and be licensed to teach in many of these countries.
Wow.
So that's a real quick overview of who we are, what we're doing, and sort of how we're doing it. Brandy, Misty, you have another question, follow up on that, because I might talk about just real briefly the need and why we're doing this.
I would love to hear about the need and how you decided that this was your right approach for the people that you're serving.
Okay, well, picture this. Picture a classroom of 60 second graders, and picture a teacher who shows up maybe 3/4 of the time, maybe half the time. And picture a teacher who basically can't pass a 4th or 5th grade English or math test. And that gives you an idea of the state of education across maybe 70% of the continent of Africa.
Wow.
The other thing to picture is this. There's a growing, vibrant church on the continent. We partner with 23 African denominations. And they have schools. And those schools are maybe a little bit better than what I just described to you in terms of the public school education system on the continent of Africa. But the problem is, in Africa, the church, it's not like here. Here in America, churches, at least in Florida, that's where we're based. In Florida, you can start a school in your basement and use whatever curriculum you want to. You're not constrained. Across the African continent, each country has a one-size-fits-all secular curriculum. So even though you're a church school, you have a secular curriculum that you help. That's pretty much all you have access to. So the church schools are Christian in name only. It's the First Presbyterian Church School, but they teach a government curriculum, and they don't really have room to teach the Bible every day because all they're doing is test prep.
Wow.
For their whole 12 years is test prep.
It's not just an American problem.
No, it is on steroids in Africa.
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't mean to deride the African education system, but I'm trying to paint a real picture of the state of the education in Africa. So God has raised Rafiki up, perhaps for such a time as this, because Rafiki, taking in orphans back in 2001, was much like maybe a homeschool family. We're taking in children. We're trying to figure out how to educate these kids. And we're like, oh my stars, we need to educate them ourselves. So we start writing our own curriculum. We start doing our own schools. And then we realize after maybe a decade of this and 10 Rafiki Villages that, wow, we have something we can share with the church. And so that's sort of our long-term vision, because the church partners, they don't teach the Bible, they don't have good materials, but now by God's grace, we do. And we've been meeting our own need by training our own teachers and having our own curriculum and having our own Bible study and being able to provide a really good education for orphans and children in need from the community. And now we have this material that we own that we can provide to 1,000 schools in the next 10 years, 2,000 schools, who knows? We can train the teachers and we can provide the materials. Now, would they all look like the very best classical Christian school in your community? No. They probably won't. That's probably a generation away. But will children be learning to read at the age of 5 instead of at the age of 15? You betcha. And will they be exposed to the great conversation? Absolutely. And Erica's going to tell you a little bit about the specifics as to what we see actually happening in our Rafiki village schools, and the vision we hope to transplant into the African church, that they will embrace this, and they are beginning to, that they will embrace this and implement this type of education across the continent, maybe 1,000 schools. Why not? And so that's it. And so that's the need. And those are the resources God has given us. And let me tell you about the potential.
Okay.
Because here's something people don't really know about Africa. In the next 30 years, 1/2 of the world's toddlers to teenagers are going to be born on the continent of Africa.
Wow.
Right. The UN estimates 2.9 billion people being born in the next 30 years, and half of them will be born in Africa. So the next generation of young people is going to be there. And so the potential to reach the next generation of young people with a better education system through the church is huge. Now, we're a little bitty organization, and we're going to do what we can, but who knows what God might do with these loaves and fishes that he has given us and this opportunity. So that's the potential. That's the opportunity to influence the next generation of the world. So your question that you kind of asked a little bit earlier is, so why classical education for Africa, right? That's a good question. And that's a question we get all the time. And I'll put it a different way. What does Athens have to do with Abuja? Abuja city in Nigeria,
totally.
Yeah. And Erica and I have both been in Abuja. We've both served in Nigeria for many years. And so we're very familiar with the city. So what does Athens have to do with Abuja? Well, just a couple of things we will tell you that we have embraced when it comes to classical education for Africa. First of all, we firmly believe, as you do, and as many of your listeners do, that it is the best education for a human being.
Amen.
Right? Don't
Yes.
you think? Absolutely. Classical Christian.
Yes.
It's the best education for human flourishing. That's been evidenced through the centuries, right? You've got from Aristotle to Augustine to Aquinas, and even Chinua Achebe, who is a very well-known African author, while not a Christian, was given basically a Cambridge education. And so he was educated in letters, right? Even at the University of Ibadan, which was 70 years ago, practically. And so it is an education that really fosters thinkers by entering the great conversation. So we believe it's the best education for a human being. Secondly, we believe, and I think you would also, that it really is the best education to wed with a Christian education or a biblical worldview. From our perspective, there are really maybe just a couple of models out there. The progressive model, which is prevalent everywhere, is a model that really says, well, there really is no truth. What's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me, right? Whereas the classical education model, they believe there was a truth. So if you want an education system that really meshes better with a biblical worldview, classical is the best alternative for content and pedagogy. And so that we embraced it early on. When we started our own schools in 2002 we even started writing our own curriculum at that time, because we understood that what was available locally in Africa was not going to be suitable. It wasn't all Christian, and it wasn't always academically rigorous. And the material available in America was too American. And so we started writing our own, and we wanted a curriculum that was classical and Christian and just culturally sensitive to Africa. I'll talk about that in a minute. And so we think it's the best education to wed with a Christian education. I mean, there's at least a focus on truth. I mean, in Plato's Republic, he was trying to define what justice and the just man is. Not 50 different views, but let's arrive at a true standard. So at least you have that in classical education. Best thing to wed with a Christian education. All right. So that was another reason. The third reason is that classical and Christian education has been the education of the church. we are working with the church in Africa. And so the most convincing argument actually for them was this argument that it has been the education of your ancestors, the people who planted the churches in Africa, who brought the gospel. For all of our sins and all of our foibles and things that the missionaries perhaps did do incorrectly, and the European colonization and the things that were brought that weren't good, the gospel was planted that way. And the church that brought that was educated classically and Christianly. That is that. So that it seems to be a very compelling argument. In fact, if you ever have the opportunity, we're happy to provide for you a lecture by Dr. Brian Williams of the Templeton Honors Program, who spoke at the Classical Christian Conference we hosted in November of 2019 in Nairobi, Kenya. It's the first classical Christian conference in Nairobi, Kenya, in Africa, that we know of. And we had Robbie Jane.
Oh, wow.
He spoke, Chris Perrin, Brian Williams, Robin Burlew, and David Diener, all classical educators from America, flew over to Kenya, did a fantastic conference for 2 days. We had about 200 to 300 people. We had homeschoolers, all Africans, homeschoolers, government people from 10 countries were there at the event. Brian did a great presentation on how classical Christian education is the education of the church. So that's why we felt like this was a great educational model. It is the education for free people. And so if Africa wants to maintain its freedom, classical Christian education is the best way to do that. That's sort of how we arrived at classical Christian education for Africa.
I just love that so much. I find that people question bringing what they call a Western education into Africa or into the East, or basically exporting it beyond our own agreed upon borders. It's so easy, I think, for people to forget that when you become a Christian, so much of that becomes your heritage too.
Right.
And so you're actually receiving your own heritage when you're getting this kind of an education, regardless of where you live or anything like that, all these accidental qualities. So anyway, I just love it. I love it.
Well put. And I'll add one last thing. We also include whatever we can discern is true, good, and beautiful from the culture, right?
Right.
I mean, because there's art, music, there is literature, particularly some that's been written recently in the last, say, 100 years. So within Africa, we help them discover what is true and good and beautiful as well in our educational system. So,
would any of those resources ever be available in English if Americans wanted to see them?
Yeah, I think, artwork, and there is literature that would be, viewed as a sort of a modern classic from various authors that are respected in the African community. And one of the things we are working on with some of our university partners is seeing how we can codify some oral works, maybe some epics. I mean, when you think about it, the Iliad and the Odyssey was oral.
Right.
It was an oral epic for hundreds of years till Homer wrote it down.
Yeah.
And so there are stories like that on the continent of Africa that perhaps are intricate and beautiful and interesting and would meet some of the criteria. So we're hoping to kind of put together some kind of an anthology that's going to be a 3 or 4 year work.
Well, that would be amazing.
We'd be happy to provide some of that. We're working on something
if you want to send us resources like that you think these families that listen to us would enjoy, we would love to help introduce people to those things. So that'd be great.
Erica would be a good source for that too.
Okay.
So absolutely.
Well, Erica, I think this question probably is more for you. We were wondering, what does it actually look like on the ground in a Rafiki village? What does the education look like? What does the life look like? Can you describe some of that for us?
Sure. Two of the most important aspects of our school, Karen has already talked about a little bit, and that is the Bible study and the curriculum. Africa does, of course, present some unique challenges, and our schools are fairly new if you put them in perspective to how long the classical movement has been resurging in America. And so you may go into our schools and you may not see a school as developed in classical pedagogy as you might find here in America. So I want to talk a little bit about the Bible study. First of all, Karen has mentioned that is something that is ingrained in every part of our day in the village. We start with the Bible study in the morning in the schools, going through it's written out for different age groups. So everybody's studying the same passage at the same time. And that is, of course, the most important thing that we offer to our kids. We had a father who had recently put one of his children into the Rafiki School in Rwanda. This child comes home and grabs the Bible and teaches his father a new truth, and that the father never knew. That Karen pointed out was that we did write our own curriculum. And what you will see is students who are actively participating in the learning in the classroom. That's just not common in many African classrooms. So it is a real treasure. We're not using the government curriculum. We're using our own curriculum. We are meeting all the government standards. We're just using our own curriculum to do it. And so they come in with skepticism, but when they see it, when they walk into the classroom and they see first graders reading, and they see children participating and asking really thoughtful questions, they often don't leave without asking us how they could enroll their own child in our school. And so, as I was saying, it's not perfect. It's not, but there's a lot of progress that's being made, and things are taking longer. But our headmasters in our schools are not primarily concerned with the bureaucracy aspect. We often hire national staff who will handle government interfacing and submitting reports and all of that. The missionary headmasters that we send out to our schools, their primary objective is training teachers and spending time in the classrooms, observing and helping our teachers grow and learn and understand this classical pedagogy and the classical curriculum that we've given to them so that we can grow. And as I mentioned, it's really evident to the community that there's something different, there's something special going on, and many people want their children there.
Sounds like the teachers have a similar experience that I know a lot of homeschool moms would relate to as well, which is learning while you're doing it. Adapting as you go, as you learn a little bit more, and you learn, you just gain knowledge yourself while teaching.
Exactly. I had a teacher when I was serving in Nigeria as a headmaster. One of the teachers, after a few years of being there, maybe you've experienced this when you first learned about classical education, after a while, there's that anger that, why didn't anybody tell me? and he experienced that. And he came, he said, I don't understand why nobody gave this to me before. And it's just wonderful to see the teachers gaining that understanding and that appreciation for this different way of teaching that is really valuable to their students. But then, like you said, they're adding a lot of value to their own lives.
Some of what you said reminds me of, we often talk about in homeschooling about how this is generational work. Like, you can't expect to offer your children the perfect classical education when you didn't receive it yourself. And, people will struggle with all sorts of things, subject area things like Latin or skills they weren't given. I know for me, being raised in the California public schools, they didn't teach grammar during the time that I was in school, so I didn't learn it. We often come back to the idea that, we give our children better than what we received in hopes that they will give the grandchildren even better than what they received. And generation after generation can build upon a foundation that runs all the way back in time to our ancestors and is a solid one to build upon. So this is exciting.
Exactly.
Yeah, Erica, tell them some of the courses, what some of the literature the children do get exposed to, some of the classics in our school, and maybe you can give them a little bit of that in the world history, and I think in the logic and rhetoric. We do try and They get, at least to get a taste of it, right?
That's right. So there are all kinds of literature books. As Karen said, we do try to incorporate African literature, and we encourage our teachers to go to local bookstores and find what African literature they can. But in addition to that, we want them to read C.S. Lewis. So Misty, they're joining me and reading works from C.S. Lewis. They're reading biographies of missionaries. They're reading the epics like the Elliott and the Epic of Gilgamesh. They're reading some of that, and they're reading works from Shakespeare. So there really is a broad approach, as is appropriate, right, in classical education, in the types of materials that they're reading. And I can say that logic and rhetoric as courses are totally foreign to the African context. And so that takes a lot of work to prepare teachers to teach them. But again, our curriculum does include that lesson for the teacher before they go in to teach the students. And so our students are studying that, and they are studying church history. They're studying the history of the world and philosophy and those kinds of things.
Yeah, we did. We modeled our history sort of like what cycle that Susan Wise Bauer had, right, in the story of the world. So they get world history starting. Is that right? They get it started in second grade. Is that right, Erica?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, and then we repeat it again and kind of repeat it again. And so they get you just don't see world history taught hardly at all in African schools. They get history, they get social studies maybe, and they get government history of their country, but not an exposure to the world like that.
So are all of these resources translated into their native languages?
No, the countries that we serve in all use English as a medium of education.
Oh, wow.
English as a medium of education. So all of these courses are taught in English.
Okay.
We do teach their local languages as well. And in some cases, we teach French as well.
Okay.
Depending on the country.
Yeah. And even in a public school, would they be receiving instruction in English?
In most countries, that's true.
Okay.
In Tanzania, most public schools are in Kiswahili, but they do have some English medium schools.
Okay. I'm just curious about that. Interesting.
What has been the fruit that you've seen so far while providing the classical Christian education in these countries? It's been a little bit more than 10 years since the schools have been active.
Almost 20.
Or 15, almost 20%.
Yeah. Erica could probably give you some couple of good examples. And I may have one too, Erica, but you go first.
Okay. Well, we are really excited that we have more and more students graduating from our schools every year. Our first graduates from grade 12 were in Ghana back in 2013. And since they've gone off to university, and we had our first university graduate finish in 2019, 6 young ladies who were orphans in our orphan home and had gone all the way through the Rafiki School and then gone all the way through college. And they majored in things like English and business, accounting, industrial chemistry.
Wow.
And they're doing very well. And like I said, now we have graduates in many countries: Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, and Zambia. Our schools in those countries all have graduates from our school who've gone on to university. And I tell you that some of the reports that we hear from university professors, when we follow up to see how they're doing, they remark upon their maturity, upon their willingness to participate in class, upon their moral character. And they do very well as far as grades are concerned when they get off to university. So we're so thankful for that. But we also hear from parents of our day students who are still young and still in school about how the children are developing. I remember hearing from one father who came in and talked to me about his child who was in our primary school, and he had only been in our school for a short time. But he was just remarking about the fact that when he wakes up in the morning, now he comes and greets his parents and shows respect to them in a way that he didn't before. And of course, that's the benefit of a Christian education, right? Where you teach children to respect their parents and to emulate the Lord Jesus. So we see that. And also, if we had children, I had another student who moved. His family was moving to another area, so he wasn't going to be able to continue in our school. And so he went and took the entrance exams at the school he was going to, and his parents called and just thanked us because he performed so well, and the school he was going to was really impressed with his performance. And this means a lot. You know, when you're living in an area that's so focused on testing and cramming for national exams, and you don't do that, you don't cram, the parents are worried. You know, they're worried that their kids are not going to be able to pass the exams, or that they're going to miss out on an opportunity to go to university. And that's just not been the case. We've seen kids perform exceedingly well and have opportunity. I've had even day students who have come to the school who graduated and went off and studied architecture or engineering in university. They really do very well.
That's encouraging. I mean, I know it's not why we do what we do, but it, I think, helps people accept that we're not insane for doing what we do. So that's very encouraging to hear.
It really is effective. We've got a young man who's now one of our teachers in our school in Kenya. And he came to the Rafiki School as a day student. He was an orphan, and he came in at about 6th grade. And our schools are free, or they're heavily subsidized because people here donate money for scholarships. So he's able to come to our school at 6th grade. Otherwise, his education would have stopped at 6th grade. Because once you get beyond that level, you pretty much have to pay for school for your children. And his parents were dead. So he comes to our school, and from 6th grade to 12th grade, he reads practically every book in the library.
Wow.
Voracious learner. And then he finds out we have a teacher's college, which is free. So he goes through the teacher's college, and he becomes a great classical Christian teacher. In our program, by the way, our children receive art and music. We have a little symphonia in Uganda. We have a quartet, and we have violinists and cellists in Kenya. We have some really good choirs, and they do art shows after they've spent time in our art. We have art curriculum from preschool all the way through the college. Everybody gets exposed to art and art history. So he just fell in love with it. And so he finishes 3 years at the teacher's college, and we loved him so much. We hired him on to be like a TA in the teacher's college for a couple of years. And the guy was such potential that would have been, I mean, if you saw where this young man came from, the housing and living situation that he came from, it's just amazing he's able to even get up and go anywhere in the day. So here, and now he was a teacher's assistant in our teacher's college there at the village in Kenya. And now he's, I think, a 6th grade teacher in our school. And so it's been like that's what, 6 plus 3, that's probably a 12-year history with this young man. And so we're just delighted to see one life at a time transformed by this wonderful, Christian and classical education. And he came to know the Lord during his time at the village. And we have story after story after story, because the other problem on the continent of Africa is the prosperity theology, which is rampant. And so sound doctrine that is taught to children from the time they're 3 is so essential. It really helps the church. And of course, we're also helping the church by providing them the Bible study and the curriculum and trained teachers, so we can ensure that sound teaching goes out to their own schools and to the children there. So there's that challenge on the continent. And so people, it's either a works theology or it's prosperity theology. And so they come to the Rafiki School and they really hear and understand the gospel for the first time. So we have a number of children, not just the orphans who grew up with us, but children from the community who really come to know the Lord. And so it's just great. It's great to be able to be a part of this in some way with these young people.
I want to comment a little bit on what Karen was saying about the potential. A lot of private schools in Africa will cherry pick their students and find those who have a home situation that will support their success in school. That really hasn't been the case in our schools. We have children in our own orphan home who have had really just horrific background stories. We have children who come from extremely poor families. And we have some middle-class African families who join our school as well. But I think what is so beautiful to see is that those kids who the community and the culture may have just written off because they didn't have nutrition when they were growing up and they didn't have a family structure to support them, they succeed and do well. And it really is a great comment when people think that, oh, well, we just need to give these kids vocational education and just give them something so that they can work. Yeah, we agree. They should be able to support themselves and support their families. But these young people are capable of so much more. They're capable of reading Homer. They are capable of reading Plato. And they do, and they enjoy it, and they become very well spoken, and they write well. The potential is enormous.
It's actually very encouraging. Hearing what you have to say, you're doing it at a level, not the perfect, fancy college prep academy that is so common. People question, like, does it matter that English is the second language for some of these kids, or just different things that come up?
Right. Yeah. No, it doesn't. Absolutely. Those are the very children that need this more than anybody.
Well, I know you guys have to be going, and I feel like I could talk to you for another hour if we had the chance. But thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us about what is happening in the Rafiki Villages and what God is doing. And like I told you earlier, if you have anything that they want to pass our way, we'd be happy to share in any way we can.
We appreciate that. People can pray for us. People can think about becoming missionaries and going out like the Nelsons. Okay. We need people to serve in the villages to help model this educational system. And then, another way you can do this without leaving the comfort of your home is we have curriculum for sale, Bible study for sale. Our own classical Christian curriculum is now available here in the States for people to use as in a homeschool setting or in schools that are starting up. I think our material is a good starter set of curriculum for a startup Christian classical school. But we have a Bible study that also is great for homeschoolers or for a school. Every book of the Bible for every day of the week for every age level. And almost all the proceeds, we print it all here. We write it all here. We graphic arts it all here. And so the proceeds, most of the money that people would pay to buy this stuff goes back into the mission in Africa. So it's a dual purpose purchase. So that's a way you can support us and also benefit yourself. And people can always sponsor an orphan. They can always sponsor a day student. They can help with the scholarships. But that's all on our website. And we put the link in your thing so you can send that out to your audience. And we'd love to talk to more people about it.
That's wonderful.
Great.
Yeah.
This has been a great conversation. And I think it's education and Bible study and knowing God better, no matter what context and culture you're in. Those are, that's what we're all working on. And it's, I think, just a beautiful thing how much those ideas, fit wherever they're planted, and that human flourishing. We just pray for Rafiki and their ministry, that it will continue, that you will continue to graduate those students who will end up returning and serving that next generation. And it's exciting to see what will happen in the next few years with Rafiki.
Thank you.
Thank you both for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. This season's lineup is great. All of the books and things mentioned in today's episode are linked in our show notes. Just go to scolesisters.com/SS86 to check it out. Don't forget to sign up for the How to Choose Good Books workshop with Stephen Rummelsberg, taking place on March 27th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. Replays, of course, are available. Register at scolesisters.com/goodbooks or join our Sophie membership and have the workshop included with all the other good stuff. In our next episode, Misty, Abby, and I discuss the Thinking Person's Checklist from the back of Alan Jacobs' book, How to Think. I didn't think we'd get through the whole list, but we totally made it, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters. Okay, I'm recording.
Okay. And it says recording. Okay, good. Phew.
That's a relief.